Sarah had always dreamed of becoming a mother. For years, she and her husband, Mike, tried everything to conceive. They had been through countless appointments, tests, and late-night talks filled with hope and disappointment. So when the faint blue line finally appeared on the pregnancy test on a chilly morning in March, Sarah's heart swelled with joy. She couldn't believe it. She was going to have a baby. The news brought an immediate burst of happiness into their lives. Sarah couldn't wait to share the excitement. She planned a special dinner that evening. With the table set and candles flickering softly, she placed the pregnancy test right next to Mike's plate. His reaction was everything she had hoped for. Eyes wide, a huge grin spreading across his face. And then, they were hugging, laughing, and even shedding a few tears. It was a moment of pure bliss, a precious memory they would cherish forever. Over the next few days, Sarah's excitement was palpable. She started reading every book on pregnancy she could find. Her internet browser was filled with tabs on baby development, healthy pregnancy diets, and what to expect each trimester. Mike was just as involved, talking to their baby every night, telling it about the world waiting outside. Their first doctor's visit was marked in bold on the calendar. Sarah counted down the days, her anticipation growing. When the day finally arrived, she and Mike walked into the clinic hand in hand, a bundle of nerves and excitement. The doctor was kind and reassuring, confirming the pregnancy and explaining the next steps. Everything seemed perfect, just like they had imagined. But as weeks turned into months, Sarah started noticing something unusual. She expected morning sickness and fatigue, but not the sharp pains that occasionally stung her sides. Nor did she anticipate the unusual fatigue that washed over her even after a full night's sleep. Concerned, she mentioned these symptoms at her next doctor's visit. The doctor listened intently, her expression turning thoughtful. She suggested a series of tests and an early ultrasound to make sure everything was okay. Sarah tried to stay positive, but a nagging worry began to grow in her heart. What if something was wrong? She couldn't bear the thought of anything harming her long-awaited child. Despite her worries, Sarah held on to the joy of her pregnancy. She filled a journal with letters to her unborn child, describing her hopes and the world that awaited. Mike stayed by her side, a rock of support, calming her anxieties and sharing in her dreams. Together, they awaited the ultrasound that they hoped would reassure them that their baby was healthy and safe. Little did they know, that appointment would bring news that would shock everyone, changing the course of their journey in ways they could never have anticipated. Sarah's second visit to the doctor was filled with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. She lay on the examination table, the cool gel spread across her belly as the ultrasound began. Mike held her hand tightly, watching the screen with a frown of concentration. The room was quiet except for the soft murmur of the machine. The doctor moved the wand expertly, but her brow furrowed slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the images on the screen. There's something unusual here," the doctor finally said, breaking the tense silence. She pointed to a shadow on the screen that didn't look like the typical ultrasound images Sarah had seen in her books. "I'd like to take a closer look at this area," the doctor continued, adjusting the machine for a better view. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Is something wrong with the baby?" she asked, her voice shaking. "It's too early to say anything definitive," the doctor replied soothingly. "It could be a number of things, many of which are perfectly normal, but I want to make sure we monitor this closely." The rest of the appointment passed in a blur for Sarah. She tried to listen as the doctor explained the need for additional tests and more frequent monitoring, but her mind raced with worry. What could that shadow mean? Was her baby in danger? Back at home, Sarah couldn't shake off her unease. She spent hours researching online, trying to find anything that could explain what the doctor had seen. Mike did his best to reassure her, reminding her that the doctor had not confirmed anything alarming yet. "Let's just follow the doctor's advice and keep our next appointment. We'll take things one step at a time," he said, wrapping her in a comforting embrace. Despite Mike's reassurance, the next few weeks were tough on Sarah. She attended every additional scan and test, holding her breath each time, hoping for good news. The doctors remained non-committal, advising patients until they had more information. With each visit, the shadow remained, an enigmatic presence that loomed over her pregnancy. Sarah's condition started to affect her daily life. She was often tired, the stress draining her energy. Her family and friends noticed the change and rallied around her, offering words of support and encouragement. They helped with housework and brought meals over, easing her day-to-day worries so she could focus on her health and the baby's well-being. Through it all, Sarah documented her feelings and experiences in her journal, addressing her entries to her unborn child. She wrote about her fears, but also about her hopes and the support she was receiving. "No matter what happens, your dad and I love you so much already," she wrote one evening, tears spilling over as she penned down her thoughts. As the date of her next major ultrasound approached, Sarah prepared herself for any outcome, armed with the love and support of her family. She knew that no matter what the test revealed, they would face it together. Little did she know that the upcoming appointment would reveal something that would astonish not only her and Mike, but also the medical team itself. The day of the major ultrasound had arrived, and Sarah felt a mixture of dread and anticipation as she and Mike walked into the hospital. The corridors seemed longer than usual, and the waiting room was crowded, but in her mind, everything was muffled, as if she were underwater. Mike squeezed her hand, a small gesture that offered her a lifeline amidst her swirling thoughts. As they were called in, the sonographer greeted them with a warm smile, perhaps sensing Sarah's tension. She carefully explained the process again, ensuring Sarah was as comfortable as possible on the examination bed. The room was dimly lit, the screen of the ultrasound machine glowing in the semi-darkness. Mike stood close by, his presence a comforting constant. The cold gel was familiar by now, a routine part of the many scans she had undergone. As the sonographer moved the probe over Sarah's belly, the familiar thumping sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, a sound that always brought a smile to Sarah's face. But today, her smile was tinged with worry as she fixed her eyes on the screen, trying to make sense of the images. The sonographer's brow furrowed as she adjusted the controls, zooming in on the area of interest. "Let's take a closer look here," she murmured, her voice calm but focused. Sarah held her breath, watching as the sonographer captured several images, her movements slow and deliberate. Finally, the sonographer paused, her eyes scanning the details on the screen. "I'm going to call in Dr. Lee to discuss these findings," she said, leaving the room briefly. Minutes later, Dr. Lee entered, a folder in her hands. She had a serious expression on her face as she sat down next to Sarah. "We found something quite unusual," Dr. Lee began, turning the screen so they could see the images clearly. She pointed to a section on the screen where, alongside the baby, was another distinct shape, something that didn't resemble normal pregnancy tissue. "This here," Dr. Lee continued, pointing to the screen, "isn't what we typically expect to see. It's not affecting the baby directly, but it's definitely something we need to understand better." Sarah's heart raced as she processed the information. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Lee offered a reassuring smile. "We need to do some more tests to find out exactly what this is. It could be a number of things, and I don't want to speculate until we have more information." She explained the next steps, which included a specialized MRI scan to get a better understanding of the unusual mass. As they left the hospital, Sarah was quiet, lost in thought about the uncertain journey ahead. Mike tried to lighten the mood, talking about the nursery they had started decorating, but the conversation soon drifted back to what the scan had revealed. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself oscillating between hope and fear. She reached out to her support network, finding solace in the stories of others who had faced uncertain times during their pregnancies. Their stories of strength and positive outcomes gave her the courage to face her own challenges. The day of the MRI finally came, and with it, a sense of resolve settled over Sarah. Whatever the outcome, She knew she would face it with the love and support of her family, ready to tackle the next steps in her journey to motherhood. As she lay in the MRI machine, the loud noises echoing around her, she closed her eyes and imagined holding her baby, healthy and smiling, a vision that gave her the strength to believe in a positive future. Sarah lay still inside the MRI machine, the loud humming filling her ears. Though she had been reassured that the scan was safe for her baby, she couldn't shake the anxiety creeping into her thoughts. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, happiness, worry, and now, uncertainty. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on something positive, imagining the moment she would finally hold her baby in her arms. That thought alone kept her strong. When the scan was finally over, Mike was waiting for her outside, his face full of concern, but also patience. He had been her rock through this journey, never letting her feel alone, even when fear gripped her heart. "You did great," he said, squeezing her hand as they walked out of the hospital. But the wait for results was going to be the hardest part. The next 2 days were slow and heavy. Sarah tried to keep herself busy, folding tiny baby clothes and organizing the nursery. Every time the phone rang, her heart jumped, thinking it was the hospital calling with answers. When the call finally came, it was Dr. Lee's voice on the other end. "We have the results, Sarah. Can you and Mike come in tomorrow morning?" she asked, her tone gentle but serious. That night, sleep was impossible. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thoughts running wild. Was it something dangerous? Was her baby at risk? She turned and saw Mike watching her. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it," he said softly, tucking the strand of hair behind her ear. His words gave her some comfort, but the fear still lingered. The next morning, they walked into the hospital together, hand in hand. Dr. Lee greeted them in her office, gesturing for them to sit. She took a deep breath before speaking. "The MRI confirmed something unusual," she said, pointing to the images on her computer screen. "Sarah, along with your baby, we've discovered another mass. It appears to be a second fetus. But before you get too excited, I need to explain something." Sarah and Mike stared at her in shock. "A second fetus," Sarah whispered, her hands instinctively resting on her belly. Dr. Lee nodded. "It's a very rare condition, known as fetus in fetu. It happens when a twin doesn't fully develop and remains inside the surviving baby or mother. In your case, it's inside you. It's not a living pregnancy, but a remnant of what could have been a twin." The words sank in slowly. Sarah had never imagined such a thing was even possible. The joy of thinking she had twins was quickly replaced by confusion. "Is it dangerous?" she finally asked. Dr. Lee offered a reassuring smile. "Right now, it doesn't seem to be causing immediate harm, but we'll need to monitor it closely. In some cases, these masses need to be removed after birth. But the good news is, your baby is growing well and doesn't seem to be affected." Sarah exhaled, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. Relief that her baby was safe, sadness for the twin that never was, and uncertainty about what the future held. But as she looked at Mike, she saw the same determination in his eyes. No matter what, they would face this together. Sarah and Mike left the doctor's office in stunned silence. The news still echoed in her mind. She had been carrying what could have been a twin inside her all this time. She placed her hand gently on her belly, feeling the tiny movements of her growing baby. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling. How could something like this happen? How had she gone through so many months of pregnancy without realizing it? As they walked to the car, Mike finally broke the silence. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, watching her closely. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "I think so. I don't know how to feel about it. It's such a strange thing to process." She looked down at her belly again, rubbing slow circles with her hand. "I'm relieved that our baby is okay, but it's also sad to think about what could have been." Mike squeezed her hand. "No matter what, we're in this together, and we'll do whatever it takes to keep both you and the baby safe." That night, Sarah lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts swirled in her mind about her baby, about the undeveloped twin, about what the doctors had said. She had read about rare medical conditions before, but she never imagined something like this could happen to her. Every little kick from her baby reminded her that life was growing inside her. But now, there was something else, something unknown, sharing the same space. The next few days were filled with medical appointments and careful monitoring. The doctors assured her that as long as the mass remained unchanged, there was no immediate danger. But the thought of carrying an undeveloped twin inside her was difficult to ignore. It wasn't something she could share with just anyone. How would people even react if they knew? Even when talking to her closest friends, she hesitated, unsure of how to explain it. To cope, Sarah focused on preparing for her baby's arrival. She decorated the nursery, folding tiny clothes and organizing baby supplies. Every little thing helped her feel more connected to her unborn child, reminding her that despite the uncertainty, she was still on the path to becoming a mother. One evening, as she sat by the crib, running her fingers over the soft blankets, Mike knelt beside her. "No matter what happens, this baby is already so loved," he said, placing his hand on her belly. Sarah smiled, feeling a sudden sense of peace. Yes, and that's what matters the most. As time passed, she started to accept the strange truth of her pregnancy. She might not fully understand why this had happened, but she knew one thing for certain. Her baby was growing strong, and she was going to be the best mother she could be. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but with Mike by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Sarah tried her best to focus on the joy of her pregnancy rather than the uncertainty surrounding the undeveloped twin inside her. The doctors had reassured her that her baby was growing normally, but the thought of carrying something so unusual still lingered in her mind. Some nights, she lay awake, running her hands over her belly, wondering about the tiny life growing within her and the other presence that had never fully formed. Mike was always there to comfort her. Whenever she felt overwhelmed, he would sit with her, listen to her worries, and remind her that they were in this together. "You're strong, Sarah. No matter what happens, you're going to bring a beautiful baby into this world," he would say, kissing her forehead. His words helped, but the nagging questions remained. What would happen when she gave birth? Would the undeveloped twin need to be removed? Would it cause complications? At her next checkup, Dr. Lee carefully examined her latest ultrasound results. "So far, everything looks stable," she said, scanning the images. "Your baby is developing perfectly. The mass hasn't changed much, but we'll continue to monitor it closely. Our priority is making sure you and your baby stay safe." Sarah nodded, feeling a little relief. "And after the baby is born, what happens then?" Dr. Lee leaned forward, her expression calm but serious. "Once you deliver, we'll need to evaluate the mass further. In some cases, it may need to be removed through surgery, but we won't make any decisions until after your delivery." Sarah swallowed hard. Surgery wasn't something she had expected, but she had come this far. She would do whatever was necessary to ensure her health and her baby's. "Okay," she said firmly. "I trust you." As the due date approached, Sarah focused all her energy on preparing for the baby's arrival. She and Mike attended birthing classes, learned breathing techniques, and even practiced packing their hospital bag. Despite the medical uncertainty, she felt a growing excitement. She was going to meet her baby soon. One afternoon, as she folded a tiny onesie, she paused and looked down at her belly, speaking softly. "You're almost here, little one. I can't wait to hold you." A small kick responded, making her laugh. In that moment, all her fears melted away. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she was ready. But just as she started feeling at ease, something unexpected happened. Late one night, as she was getting ready for bed, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. The pain faded, but moments later, another sharp jolt followed. Her heart pounded. Was it labor? or something else. Mike rushed to her side. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I don't know," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. As another pain struck, stronger this time, Sarah realized that whatever was happening, it wasn't something she could ignore. They needed to get to the hospital. Fast. Mike grabbed the hospital bag as Sarah held onto his arm, breathing through the sharp pains. He helped her into the car and drove as fast as he could while trying to keep calm. Sarah clenched her fists, counting her breaths, just like they had practiced in the birthing class. But something felt different. This wasn't like the slow, gradual contractions she had read about. The pain was sudden and intense, almost as if something inside her was shifting. By the time they reached the hospital, the staff quickly wheeled Sarah into a room. The nurses worked swiftly, checking her vitals and setting up monitors to track the baby's heartbeat. The steady thump-thump filled the room, bringing her some relief. Her baby was okay. Dr. Lee arrived soon after, her expression serious but reassuring. "Sarah, you're having contractions, but we need to check if this is true labor or if something else is happening because of the mass." Sarah nodded, gripping Mike's hand as another wave of pain rolled through her. The doctor performed an ultrasound, carefully studying the screen. Her brows furrowed slightly, and she turned to Sarah. "Your baby is in position, but the mass has shifted slightly. It's pressing against your uterus, which could be triggering the pain." "Is my baby in danger?" Sarah asked, fear gripping her chest. Dr. Lee gave a small, reassuring smile. "Right now, your baby's heartbeat is strong, but we'll need to monitor you closely. If the contractions don't slow down, we may need to deliver earlier than planned." Mike squeezed Sarah's hand. "You're doing great, love. Just breathe." Hours passed, and the pain came and went in waves. Sarah tried to focus on her breathing, but exhaustion began to weigh on her. The doctors continued monitoring her closely, hoping the contractions would slow down. But by early morning, Dr. Lee made a decision. "Sarah, the contractions are becoming more frequent, and we don't want to take any risks. We need to prepare for delivery." Sarah's heart pounded. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for, but also fearing. She exchanged a nervous glance with Mike, who kissed her forehead. "You're strong," he whispered, "and I'll be right here with you." The nurses moved quickly, preparing Sarah for delivery. The room filled with medical staff, each person focused on ensuring a safe birth. Sarah braced herself as the process began, gripping Mike's hand through every push, every moment of exhaustion. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the sound she had been waiting for filled the room. The soft, beautiful cry of her baby. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed the tiny, warm body against her chest. "It's a girl," the nurse announced, smiling warmly. Sarah sobbed, overwhelmed with love and relief. "Hi, baby," she whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. Mike leaned in, his eyes shining with emotion. But just as they thought the hardest part was over, Dr. Lee spoke again. "We're not done yet. We still need to remove the mass." Sarah's breath caught. She had almost forgotten. There was still one more challenge ahead.